Hey guys, so I'm not a good YouTuber because ever since I moved, I can't find my ring light or my normal webcam, so this is what you get. In this video, we're comparing how lasers film on traditional rolling shutter cameras, and we're comparing that with global shutter cameras. Global shutter will let us fix in camera a good portion of the issues that Dan Olson was able to do work on in post. So the red Raptors, my Canon R6 DSLR, and even all of our camera phones all use a rolling shutter. This means that they only sense a portion of the frame at once. In fact, they scan a range of pixels captured by a horizontal band of the entire frame over the time specified by the shutter speed. If the shutter angle is 180 degrees, this means the band will scan over half the time, and then no data will be captured for the other half of the overall frame's time. So this is global shutter, like 180 degrees would be capturing, off, capturing, off. And this is rolling shutter. So it's like capturing, off for half of the frame for 180 degree shutter angle, capturing, off. And in lasers where you would have like a moving dot, you can clearly see how that's going to cause some weird banding and bending artifacts, because if you're just watching it through this frame, you're gonna be able to see a lot of the motion at once, but you're going to get weird things where you only see part of the motion at once when you're doing this again and again. No matter how fast you go, it's going to make that green dot look like it's putting out a different shape or flickering differently. Okay. A global shutter camera captures the entire frame at once. If the shutter angle is 180 degrees, it's more like blinking your entire eyes open and shut for half the time of each frame. When something's in motion, a rolling shutter camera captures it across the area it was moving while it scanned. This affects quick pans in traditional footage, but also objects that are moving through the frame quickly. You may be familiar with this as the jello effect or rolling shutter distortion, where straight lines can appear bent and objects seem to wobble. When a laser is scanning its single dot very quickly, we perceive either beams or solid geometries such as sheets, boxes, tunnels, and walls. When we see this as solid, it's just a single dot moving very quickly, and our brains are filling in the motion path with our persistence of vision. But for cameras, it's going to matter how fast the laser completes its full frame journey relative to how fast the camera is capturing that entire frame. If the laser's frame output is very slow compared to the shutter time, laser effect will jump around in the camera, even though it looks static and good to our eyes. This problem is present for both rolling shutter and global shutter cameras. When you see examples like these on either rolling or global shutter, we're going to call that flicker from low laser scan speed. And this is what made Chris's artwork hard to film, because the intricacy of those designs always makes it come out the laser at only 20 to 30 frames per second. Fine for our eyes and bad for the cameras. If the laser's frame output is well above the shutter speed, then we can complete several complete traces of its path within that one camera frame. So the final fraction of a path isn't as visible relative to all the traces it got to complete during that frame's time. And it looks great, like this. Where global shutter helps the most is when we're between these two cases, especially when shooting at higher frame rates or with lower shutter angles. And that's why these new tests focus on laser frame rates between 50 and 130 frames per second coming out of the laser. That's right where we're on the edge of performance, somewhere between the two zones we know to be manageable and problematic. Here's an identical laser cue, a colored line with white beam endpoints, and it's coming out of the laser at 3 different frame rates. On the left is the red global shutter. On the right is my Canon R6 at 180 degrees, which best simulates the Raptors we currently use. Notice that when we can eke out more FPS out of the lasers, it's always going to be better, but also that the global shutter obviously outperforms the rolling shutter. Let's look at the rest of the new test footage. To orient yourself with my split screen, the lower right will always have the Canon R6 with its rolling shutter, which is kind of like the existing RED cameras we use. The other three quadrants will always have the RED Komodo, the global shutter footage. And we'll be showing it with 360, 180, and 90-degree shutter angle for comparison. While the camera's base frame rate will always be either 2997 or 5994 FPS, the little green boxes display the laser output frame rate after an averaging delay. But it's instantly when it comes out the laser, so I'll label it explicitly in the center what the laser's frame rate was. The laser's FPS output is always going to be the same across all the footage that I show at one time, since I captured the exact same laser sequence with each camera capture setting. Let's calibrate a little bit on what the two different artifacts that we're going to look for look like. Slow laser, fast camera is going to cause what I'm going to call flicker, and here are some examples I've shown you guys before. Here are some of the worst examples of flicker from our new test footage. Notice that it's present on all kinds of cameras when I film, and the lowest laser frame rate with the fastest camera frame rate, it's always going to be the worst, especially with 90-degree shutter. Flicker is what made that artwork particularly challenging, like I meant, but by the end of our first shoot, we had learned to control flicker by having the lasers work at very high frame rates, simple geometries, usually best when at least double the camera's capture frame rate. So with 180-degree shutter, this meant that if we could put out lasers at about 4 full laser frames for each final frame of capture, we could do simple lines and tunnels, and I could get about 220 FPS out of the lasers, and it looked good. What this left us with still, though, was another less annoying artifact than flicker, but that it still came primarily from the rolling shutter. And laser people call this banding or bending because it can create both of those kind of effects on screen. The colorist Dan called this a null band, and he was able to do some frame blending and other tricks, I assume, to enhance these clips. But it may be very intensive to fix up any particular piece of footage. Let's now view a full set of laser effects with a variety of laser frame rates, all filmed at 5994 FPS. With this footage, hopefully we'll be able to decide whether renting or buying a global shutter camera is more cost effective than having someone like Dan try to fix them in post. Again, all these laser cues were programmed to be right in our most challenging zone, where the laser outputs between 1 and 2 times the 59 FPS camera capture. And, like I said, we can usually get better results over scanning simple cues and shoot our footage at 29 FPS, but then it's not really possible to do slow-mo. So the point here is to judge the gain from the global shutter, which is always going to be at its best when shooting 360 degrees. And remember, the bottom right is closest to our mammoth raptors. So I'll now play all the laser clips organized from the fastest laser frame effects to the slowest. I artificially set some of these to play down slower, so please don't judge a particular laser shape to be the source of the challenge. It's just more to give us a variety of shapes to look at, test with. Yeah. And I also want to point out that the 100-degree tunnel, it looks a lot like the line in this footage because I filmed it from within the tunnel close to it. Okay,